We just learned about photosynthesis in the previous level, and now we are going to learn the opposite reaction of cellular respiration. This first process we are learning about is called aerobic respiration. Aerobic means that oxygen is present. The objectives of this level is to identify the reactants and products of each stage of respiration, being glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Identify structures of the mitochondria and their role in respiration. Describe the efficiency of energy extraction of one glucose molecule by identifying the total ATP produced at each stage. In photosynthesis, glucose is made by producers. In this chapter, we are learning how glucose is broken down by all organisms and the energy that is stored as ATP in a process called cellular respiration. Remember, this process occurs at the site of the mitochondria in eukaryotic cells. The mitochondrion has an inner and an outer membrane. The space between these two membranes is known as the inner membrane space. The cristae are folds of the inner membrane, and recall that this helps increase the surface area to promote more cellular respiration. The matrix is the space inside the cristae folds. Make sure you label the mitochondria that's in your notes. The first step in respiration is called glycolysis. Glycolysis actually occurs outside of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. The word glycolysis has meaning that can help you remember what it does. Glycose means sweet, like sugar or glucose, and lysis means split apart. Glycolysis doesn't require any oxygen, but it does need some energy to get the processes started. Of course, ATP is the one and only energy molecule that will provide the necessary energy for that reaction. In glycolysis, the 6-carbon glucose molecule that you see in green on the left-hand side is split apart into 2-pyruvic acid, which are both 3-carbon molecules. Remember that we do need to spend 2 ATP on glycolysis to start the process, but we get back 4 ATP, so we have a net gain of 2. We also get 2 NADH, which are electron carriers. After glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, the 2-pyruvic acid molecules move into the mitochondria matrix for the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle gives out 3 carbon dioxide, 1 ATP, 1 FADH2, which is another electron carrier, and then 4 NADH. Remember, glycolysis produces 2 pyruvic acid molecules, so the totals for one molecule of glucose being broken down must be doubled. So we actually get 6 carbon dioxide, 2 ATP, 2 FADH2, and 8 NADH. So where do all of these molecules go? For carbon dioxide, these were the original 6 glucose carbon dioxides that are lost, and carbon dioxide is what you exhale back out into the atmosphere. ATP is used directly to supply energy for the cell, and FADH2 and NADH are the carrying electrons and hydrogen ions over to the electron transport chain, which is our next step in cellular respiration. Remember, the Krebs cycle happens in the matrix of the mitochondria, and the electron carriers carry electrons to the electron transport chain, which you can abbreviate as ETC. This happens across the inner membrane or the cristae folds. This is a great graphic of how the electron transport chain works. You see NADH and FADH2 dropping off electrons directly to proteins in the membrane. Hydrogen ions move across the membrane from low concentration to high concentration through the proteins in the cell membrane. These same proteins pass the electrons down the membrane all the way to oxygen, or O2. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor. When it accepts the electron, it also picks up a hydrogen atom and becomes a water molecule. This is the water that's produced in cellular respiration. As the hydrogen ions diffuse through ion channels back into the matrix, ATP synthase spins and adds a phosphate to ADP to form ATP. This is where a majority of the energy is made during the process of cellular respiration. I know that word is hard to see. I can't fix it. It says ATP synthase, synthase. Overall, the big picture of respiration is to make energy from glucose. In glycolysis, 2 ATP are made. In the Krebs cycle, 2 ATP are made, and in the electron transport chain, 32 to 34 ATP are made. That gives a total of 36 to 38 ATP being made from one glucose molecule. Not all organisms need oxygen to survive. Some organisms, like various bacteria, actually don't require oxygen for respiration. These organisms perform anaerobic respiration. Certain cells in your own body, like muscle cells, will also perform anaerobic respiration if they are lacking oxygen. Anaerobic means the absence of oxygen. So we use oxygen to release chemical energy from the food we eat, but if oxygen is not around, we do perform a pathway that goes through the absence of oxygen that's called anaerobic respiration. Fermentation is an anaerobic process that allows organisms to generate energy when oxygen is not available by allowing glycolysis to continue. Remember that glycolysis splits glucose into 2 pyruvic acid molecules. After glycolysis, the pyruvic acid and NADH enter fermentation. During fermentation, cells convert NADH produced by glycolysis back into the electron carrier NAD+, which allows glycolysis to continue producing ATP. There are 2 types of fermentation. The first one is alcoholic fermentation. Yeasts and a few other microorganisms use alcoholic fermentation. In alcoholic fermentation, pyruvate is broken down into alcohol and carbon dioxide. This is used in the production of beer, wine, and bread. Note in the chemical equation of alcoholic fermentation, alcohol CO2 and NAD+ are produced from pyruvic acid and NADH. The second type of fermentation is lactic acid. Bacteria and some animal cells use lactic acid fermentation. This process occurs in animal muscles when the tissues require energy at a faster rate than oxygen can be supplied. It is used to convert lactose sugars into lactic acid in yogurt and cheese production. It also gives the sour taste to fermented vegetables like pickles. Note the equation for lactic acid fermentation. The reactants are the same as alcoholic fermentation, but the products are lactic acid and NAD+. In your muscle cells, lactic acid fermentation is used for short, quick bursts of energy. Your body uses ATP that is already in muscles as well as the ATP made by lactic acid fermentation. Muscle cells use up oxygen more rapidly than it can be delivered to them during strenuous exercise. When oxygen becomes depleted, your muscles switch from cellular respiration to lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid accumulates in the muscle, which can cause cramping pain and fatigue. Like I said, this is a quick burst of energy and only supplies enough ATP for about 90 seconds. For exercise longer than about 90 seconds, aerobic respiration is the only way to continue generating a supply of ATP. All right, make sure you have your own chart filled in your notes. This information is very important to help you compare and contrast aerobic and anaerobic cellular respiration.